He was a real estate tycoon with expensive tastes.
He wanted people to know that he had money, that he was successful.
He's the kind of person that when he came in the room, you knew he had come in the room.
Until his mile-high ambitions came crashing down to earth.
For someone to be literally blown up in a high-profile, high-end Tucson resort was very attention-grabbing.
The investigation would delve into the exclusive world of Tucson's rich and famous to catch an assassin out to make a killing.
The story is the epitome of American greed.
Friday, November 1st, 1996. It's a little after 5 p.m., and Tucson's leisure class is kicking off the weekend with a round of golf. The players are among the city's most rich and powerful, and the biggest name on the course is 52-year-old Gary Triano.
Gary Triano was a very charismatic personality. He was sort of a larger-than-life real estate mogul.
Every Friday, he would be out on the course with people he was trying to get to invest in his latest venture.
But this time, Gary's wheeling and dealing ends with a bang.
And at the end of the golfing, he came back to his car, and when he got into his car, the bomb went off.
The explosion is described as like a funnel cloud that can be seen for miles from this resort.
The roof has been peeled off the car by the explosive force. The doors have been blown open. The windshield's gone.
It looked like somebody had just crushed this Lincoln Continental like a matchbox.
First responders quickly arrive, but 52-year-old father and businessman Gary Triano is pronounced dead at the scene.
There was no chance that Gary was going to survive this explosion. He was right on top of it.
How could somebody hate somebody so much to want to murder them in such a violent and public way?
Gary Triano was a longtime resident of Tucson who'd grown up with dreams of making it big.
He was a Tucson kid, went to the University of Arizona, was in business with his father, if I remember right, selling cars in the beginning.
Gary was first married to Mary Cram, and they were a very, very powerful couple, I would say. They had 2 children.
By the early 80s, Gary had closed enough deals to become Tucson's leading real estate developer.
If you were someone who was involved in the financial business in Tucson, Gary Triano was somebody you would have known.
Gary was very flamboyant. He was a high roller. When he had money, he would spend money. He would tip lavishly. He would go on long trips to Europe.
But Gary also took care of those less fortunate.
Gary was very philanthropic, and he believed in the Boys and Girls Club here. He was very, very good to this community.
In 1986, Gary's reputation earned him the attention of another Tucson luminary, Pamela Phillips.
But Pam was, kind of up by the bootstraps gal from Tucson.
She wanted to be one of the first females that was in commercial real estate in Tucson. And she achieved that. She made it all the way to the top.
Gary hosted numerous parties, and friends tell me that she would go to these parties, and that's how they met.
She sort of crashed the party, zeroed in on Gary. They had a whirlwind romance. They get married right away. They have a very lavish wedding. It's a black tie affair on a yacht in San Diego.
He left Mary to get married to Pamela Phillips.
They were kind of a power couple in Tucson. Donald Trump came here at one point with Marlo Maples and stayed with them for about a month.
They became friends and later went down to Mar-a-Lago.
They become part of that jet set where they're flying off to, have lunch in Greece or flying to his estate in Florida.
But in the early 90s, Gary and Pam's jet-setting days came to a sudden end.
He was, tapped out. I mean, all those wonderful jet trips cost a lot of money.
She realizes that her marriage is not what she believed it to be when she's pregnant with her first child. But 2 kids into the marriage, she's now having to put up her own money to keep Gary afloat.
Gary was forced out of one of the Indian gaming businesses at the time, and once he was forced out of that, as well as some of the real estate things that were going on, Gary lost money and ended up having to file for bankruptcy.
Gary started getting into real trouble financially, and I think Pam got very scared for her and her children's safety because of that. And I think that's what finally triggered the divorce.
I mean, they were not happy with each other. So she takes the kids and takes off to Aspen. He's gone through a bankruptcy. He is living in a spare bedroom of a friend of his. He's driving a borrowed car. He's more down and out than he's been for quite a while.
In spite of these setbacks, Gary was determined to turn his life around.
Gary was the type of guy that he would never give up, and even though he was down today, there was a real good chance that by next year he'd be back on top.
He wanted to convey the image and the message that he was making some kind of a comeback.
But he would never get the chance. Someone had made sure Gary never climbed back to the top, and Tucson police are determined to find out who.
Everybody was in total disbelief. This is the kind of stuff that you read about, you see it on TV, but you don't think it's going to happen to you.
This is not only a whodunit case and a howdunit case. What would drive somebody to do this?
Coming up, Gary Triano was deeper in the hole than anyone realized.
When reporters asked the sheriff if there are any suspects, Sheriff Dupnik said, "Open the phone book."
Millionaire real estate developer Gary Triano has been killed by a car bomb outside of Tucson's exclusive La Paloma Country Club. Police arrive to find the area in complete chaos.
It's really hectic because you've got bits and pieces of the car all over the parking lot. You've got golfers and employees wandering out now into the crime scene. It's pandemonium.
Initially, what we do is we totally contain the scene. So in other words, we shut down the entire country club. What you see initially when you actually go to the blast scene is there's a Lincoln Town car sitting parked in a parking space. The roof has been peeled off the car by the explosive force. The doors have been blown open. The windshield was blown out of the car over the trees and landed in the swimming pool.
There were parts of the car up on the roofs of the buildings nearby.
To see a major, massively destructive blast like this was a first for me. I mean, this would be the world's biggest jigsaw puzzle, with no picture of what the puzzle was.
The crime scene is so complex, federal agents are brought in to assist the investigation. Over the next few days, they are able to reconstruct the bombing.
It's not just the sheriff's department at that point, but they call in assistance from the Tucson Police Department bomb squad. ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The FBI comes in.
The ATF guys, they took all the pieces of the material back to their lab in California, and they started telling us about how it was a pipe bomb.
The bomb looked like it had been sort of like it was an amateur had done it. You know, it was a 17-inch pipe bomb, which was already a strange measurement for a pipe bomb.
The device was actually overbuilt for its purpose. It was far more explosive power than was needed. Our belief was it was built off the instructions off the internet and probably wasn't built to the specifics of killing a sole occupant of a vehicle.
The bomb itself, we were able to determine, was housed in a canvas bag, a mundane canvas bag, easily purchased. Through interviews, we knew that Gary very rarely locked his car, so it was not hard to believe that the killer just opened the car door, placed the bag with the bomb in it.
What we didn't know is what detonated the device. Was it motion activated? Was it on a timer? Or was it command detonated?
Eventually, what ATF is able to determine is that it was remote controlled. The killer was probably within 100 yards, laying in wait with his remote detonator.
Nat told us that the killer had to be in the parking lot. They had to watch Gary get into the car that night before they detonated the bomb.
And the bombers set their trap for Gary during his birthday weekend.
It was his birthday, and there was a celebration for him that weekend. So he may very well have thought that this was somebody, a friend, that dropped off a birthday present for him.
The golf outing had been prearranged so that the family knew where he was going to be and when he would be coming back home.
They were waiting, all excited to surprise him, and instead, their surprise turned into a nightmare. Had to have been somebody who knew Gary, knew his habits.
He had to sit there patiently waiting after he planted the device in the car. And then once he saw Mr. Triano get in the car, he pulls the trigger.
It's pretty evil when you think about it.
When investigators speak to Gary's family, they say he's made more than a few enemies over the years.
What we found out pretty soon was that Gary had a lot of business dealings, but he currently was in a large amount of debt, over $26 million in debt.
It was clear by the end of his life that he was spending a lot of money he didn't have.
Gary had lots of friends in high places, and he was able to sort of, rob Peter to pay Paul. He was always doing a sort of shell game where he was shuffling money around.
Gary's ex-wife believes one of those enemies decided to get payback.
When Pam and I met at the sheriff's department, she talked a lot about the Indian gaming and about threats as a result of the Indian gaming.
She believes that Gary, was involved in all kinds of nefarious dealings and that it had to have been organized crime somehow.
She said he was on a hit list, and she was scared. And I never saw her scared.
We talked to numerous people who told us that Gary had mentioned to them that he felt like he was being followed. We never were able to get anything that we felt like we could follow up on as far as identifying who that might be.
If you owe money to the mob, they kill you publicly so other people get the message.
Coming up, a shocking tip leads investigators across state lines.
When you take all the information that was found, you can't ignore it. It's almost like this guy has got his shopping list to murder Gary Triano.
Tucson police are investigating the murder of 52-year-old real estate mogul Gary Triano. And the evidence so far suggests his killer might be connected to the mafia.
Tucson is the place that a lot of reputed mobsters have retired in because they consider it safe. It's kind of off the beaten path a little bit. The Bonanno family retired there. The Castellanos retired there.
The idea that it was a mob hit, it came from the fact that it was a car bombing.
When you think of a car bomb, you think of sort of East Coast mafia, mob kind of thing.
With over $25 million in unpaid debts, the list of suspects seems endless.
Gary had borrowed money from a lot of different people. There were investors in Mexico that some people thought were, less than reputable. he had actually started negotiations with a group in China.
Gary Triano not only owed $4.5 million to casinos in Las Vegas, he was threatening a lawsuit against a guy named Gary Fears in St. Louis.
Gary had so many enemies that, it would have been easier to find out who wanted to keep him alive than want him dead.
Detectives track down every possible lead, but despite his suspicious business dealings, they keep coming up empty-handed.
In the days and weeks after the bombing, detectives are interviewing every known associate of Gary Triano that they can find.
You follow out the thread of organized crime. You follow out the thread of a person who was financially crippled by Mr. Triano's failed financial advice. And as you followed each of those out through the investigation, they all just went away. There was nothing in his life that when you took it and amassed it and put it together that led to a motive for murder.
Then, just as the investigation seems to hit a dead end, the Pima County Sheriff's Office receives some unexpected help.
It was national news, and that first week after the bombing, I got a message to call a detective in Aspen, Colorado. And that's when I first met Detective Jim Crowley. Detective Crowley talked to me about a fraud investigation that he was involved in, that Ron Young was the principal suspect.
He was a businessman who was really more of a confidence man.
Investigators learned that 7 months before Gary Triano's murder, Aspen authorities were preparing to bring in Ron Young on fraud charges. He disappeared before they got the chance.
He was on the run. He was on the run because he had a warrant out for his arrest.
Ron Young had rented a van using a fictitious credit card. And result of that, the van was reported stolen.
The van stolen in Aspen had turned up in California 1 month before the murder, and it appears to contain new evidence investigators now realize is connected to Gary's murder.
In October of 1996, in Brea, California, some neighbors report a van that's been parked on their street in a cul-de-sac for a few days. They call the local law enforcement. The cop sees it as a stolen vehicle, and they call the detective up in Aspen that had taken the stolen report and say, we got this van, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in it that we have no idea what this means.
Jim Crowley, the detective from Aspen, searches the van, and in it he finds a sawed-off shotgun. He finds notes that list close relations or friends of Gary Triano. He finds a map of Tucson.
Detective Crowley says, hey, I saw the bombing on the news, and I think that bombing is related to a fraud case that I've been working in Aspen.
He knew that he had to get a hold of us and share his information with our investigation.
When Tucson detectives inspect the van's contents, they find more clues connecting Ron to the bombing.
We went back to all the contents of the van and really delved into them. And that's when we found friends and relatives, car descriptions, car license plates of friends and family close to Gary Triano.
They've got receipts from a hotel here in Tucson that was in close proximity of where the Triano house was.
We went to the hotel and went through all their receipts from 1996, and were able to show that Ron had stayed in this hotel here in Tucson for about a week prior to the murder.
It's quite possible when Gary told his friend that he felt somebody was following him, it was Ronald Young.
But why would a con man from Aspen murder a struggling Tucson real estate developer?
It's all very suspicious, but where's the motive? At this point, Ron Young has just disappeared. He is nowhere to be found. He has gone off the maps.
Coming up, investigators follow the money to find the missing pieces of the puzzle.
In other words, who benefited financially from Gary's death?
Thanks to a call from the Aspen Police Department, investigators in Tucson have discovered that a con man named Ronald Young was targeting Gary Triano. The question is, why? As detectives in Arizona and Colorado compare notes, they realize the two men share a personal connection.
Jim Crowley, a detective with the Aspen Police Department, he said, I happen to have interest in Pam Phillips, who is Gary Triano's ex-wife.
Before the bombing happens, Detective Crowley gets an interesting phone call from Pam Phillips about a year prior. Pam Phillips calls him up because Pam has realized that she's just been defrauded, bilked out of $300,000 by Ron.
She called me and said, yeah, I just got taken and this guy just, took all my money.
But it seems Pam had quickly withdrawn the accusation.
Crowley goes into depth that publicly she cried wolf, that Ron Young had done these horrible financial things to me, but wouldn't go on record and wouldn't file a report with the Aspen Police Department.
Meanwhile, Ron and her kind of make up, and she strangely calls Detective Crowley and says, you know what, it was my mistake. I made an accounting error, and I don't want to press charges anymore.
I'd ask her about him, and she'd just turn her head and walk away. She never, ever said his name again.
Pam's friends think they know why. According to them, the two had started out as business partners about a year after her divorce, but their relationship wasn't strictly professional.
Initially, their relationship is sort of a teacher-pupil relationship. Ron is making himself useful in Pam's life. He's taking care of her business, and their relationship sort of morphs into more than a business arrangement.
And it came out that she was romantically involved with Ronald Young in Aspen.
Every once in a while, they'll have drinks too late, and Ron will wind up asleep on the couch, sometimes then wanders into the bedroom.
I think Pam used her beauty and sex for men in that way. That was her tool.
Investigators now know that Pam is the connection between Ron and Gary Triano. But had Ron been using her to get to her husband? Or was Pam in on the plot?
It could be, certainly, that Ron Young had sort of looked into Pam Phillips's background, collected a lot of information about her and her ex-husband to try to perpetrate some further fraud on her.
The big question that remained for Detective Gamber was, did he work alone? Did Ron Young do this on his own?
To test Pam, investigators ask her to come in for an interview.
During the interview, I didn't want her to know how much I knew about Ron. So when I pretty much nonchalantly threw his name out, there was just a long pause.
She's denying his relationship with her. She completely minimizes him and their relationship to the point of, how did you hear about him?
Outwardly, she appeared to cooperate with the investigation. It wasn't until we asked her if she would take a polygraph that she started some more pausing and some more, no, I don't know if I want to do that.
Police find Pam's behavior suspicious. But she and Gary were already divorced. So what motive would she have for killing him?
We have to follow the money. And where it got interesting is when we started to look at Pam Phillips.
We had pulled the divorce records, and we knew that there were a lot of issues. The divorce wasn't smooth. There was fight over the children. There was allegations that Gary was hiding money.
This is a time when Pam is running out of money. I mean, she tells the au pair at one point that she's down to her last $60,000.
As investigators dig deeper, they discovered that Pam still stood to gain a lot from Gary's death.
The detectives are doing their due diligence. They do find out about the insurance policy that Pam Phillips had on Gary's life, that she maintained even after the divorce.
The insurance policy consisted of a $2 million life insurance. I was told, and then we were able to confirm through records, that the children were the beneficiaries.
But the children are minors, and so Pam's the guardian, of course, so she's getting the money.
Pam took that money and bought her first house with it in Aspen. I was invited over there to go house hunting with her.
It's like, who had the most to benefit and who had the motive? And Pam Phillips had the motive.
But investigators know it's still not enough to make an arrest.
So the really frustrating part about this case is that, they have all of this evidence, but there's too many loose ends.
Pam Phillips was definitely a potential suspect. However, one of the main people that we wanted to talk to was a fugitive, and he was nowhere to be found.
By November of 1997, the case has come to a complete standstill. Detectives begin to wonder if it will ever be solved.
We revisit the story on the 1-year anniversary. Still no arrests, no one in custody, no person of interest, nothing, nada.
The only really unknown at the end of the task force was we needed to talk to Ron Young.
Coming up, the hunt for the missing con man finally ends.
So after this long 9-year hiatus, they finally get the tip.
Nearly a decade after the murder of Gary Triano, detectives are still focused on 2 suspects, Pamela Phillips and Ron Young. But they still don't have enough evidence to charge either of them, and Ron is still in hiding.
Everybody worked this case down to the last possible lead, and then we were left, where's Ron Young?
In November of 2005, investigators decide to make one last attempt to draw Ron out.
I mean, there's this push that we need to do something on it. The sheriff's department really wants to solve this case.
When the thought of America's Most Wanted came up, it seemed like a logical way to at least try to locate him.
It really hit the national spotlight when it debuted. It just kind of let everybody know to be on the lookout for this man who is a person of interest, Ronald Young.
The episode airs on November 19th. Within 24 hours, Tucson police get the tip they were hoping for.
What happened was Ron Young's chiropractor in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, called in and said, Ron, this guy is a patient of mine, but he's a patient under a different name.
Not only is he a client, but he's got an appointment that morning. So there is this scramble for the fugitive detail in Broward County to set up outside this chiropractor's office. Sure enough, Ron Young comes up in a taxi and is immediately apprehended.
With Ron finally in custody, investigators swiftly execute a search warrant for his apartment and vehicle.
There are boxes and boxes of, all sorts of things, floppy disks, thumb drives, hard drives, paper receipts. There is just this treasure trove of information.
As the recordings were analyzed, as computer was analyzed, it was evident that they had a financial relationship.
The evidence that's becoming clear is that Ron Young is owed $400,000 by Pam Phillips for a job that he did for her.
He's meticulously, like an accountant, kept track of every payment.
Over the course of years, there are tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash that Pam Phillips is sending to Ron Young. That's obviously huge evidence, but it's the phone calls that Ron Young has been recording between the two of them that ultimately is the downfall for both of them.
When investigators listen to the tapes, they immediately recognize the 2 voices.
We took one of the micro cassettes, put it into a recorder, and started to play it, and instantly you heard Ron Young's voice, and he was talking to Pam Phillips.
I can't really talk right now, but I put something in the mail. Thanks, bye.
And the minute I heard her voice, I knew that he was talking on the phone with Pam Phillips. And at that point, I just said, this has got to be the answer. Probably one of the most damning recordings was when there was an argument over the money, how much she was sending or how much she wasn't sending.
I'm like cashless. I need to restructure, reorganize, do something. You know what? I just can't handle this. I really can't. It's too dangerous.
She argues with him, says, I've paid you enough. And Ron Young says, you will pay me the rest of my money or you will be in prison for murder. And her response is, so will you.
That's when I said, okay, we've got him.
But when Aspen police try to arrest Pamela, they discover she's now on the run.
After the indictment came down, they found that she had left for Europe.
What we know is that she took a flight that took her through Atlanta, then on to Gatwick Airport in London, and then possibly on to Munich. And that's all we know.
To track her down, detectives enlist the aid of Interpol.
They start conducting a European investigation on her. And about 1 year later, I get a call, and it's basically Pam is in custody in Vienna, Austria.
The way that they track her down, in a very ironic, almost coincidental scenario, is she stiffs her limousine driver.
She didn't pay him one time, and the guy went to the police there. That's how she got caught.
She has again found herself a rich man, to align with. And she's living the high life again. She has literally reinvented herself in Vienna, Austria.
On July 2nd, 2010, Pam is finally taken into custody at the Tucson International Airport.
What was reported to me is her comment was, if Gamber's in the airport, I'm not getting off the plane. Then she gets handed over to me. So it was a good feeling.
I kept asking her questions the whole time until she got into the detective's car. And I said, well, how does it feel to be back in Tucson? And she looked at me and she said, it's very hot. Well, it got a lot hotter.
Coming up, Gary's accused killers finally stand trial. But will a jury convict them?
I knew it was only the beginning. The investigation was going to go under a microscope.
Nearly 18 years after the murder of real estate tycoon Gary Triano, prosecutors in Tucson, Arizona have finally charged two co-conspirators with the crime. Gary's ex-wife, Pamela Phillips, and her ex-lover, Ron Young. The trials began with Ron Young in February of 2010.
The evidence is, the recordings, all the evidence that he'd saved.
He makes a trip to Tucson, and he stalks Gary, and he learns about his habits.
Ron Young had established Gary's pattern of going to the La Paloma Country Club. He constructed the device. He planted it in the car. He sat back and he waited for Gary Triano's golf game to end, and that's when he hit the detonate button.
The public defender's office just said that the state's case was very circumstantial and didn't rise to the level of beyond a reasonable doubt.
But the jury disagrees. Ron is found guilty.
Ron never admitted to anything. He professed his innocence throughout the trial. It was the jury that came back and decided that he was involved in this.
4 years later, it's Pamela's turn to face a jury.
Before she goes to trial, the judge deemed that she was incompetent to stand trial. So she goes through all these tests and she goes through all this rehabilitation to get her competent to stand trial.
Basically, the prosecution theory of the case is that Ron Young was hired by Pam Phillips to kill Gary Triano.
They wind up getting into an arrangement where Pam convinces Ron that she's got this $2 million life insurance policy, and that if he carries out this hit on Gary, she'll pay him $400,000.
According to the DA, the meticulous notes Ron kept are more than enough proof of Pam's involvement.
She gets the money from the insurance claim early 1997, and she starts paying Ron Young these payments shortly thereafter. We're talking $400,000. And it's being paid out in bits and pieces. You know, it was very suspicious.
He was doing work for her, trying to help her start this business called Star Babies. And he wanted the money sent to him in a wire transactions that were kind of separated and hidden and looked bad.
But that isn't the only evidence linking Pamela to the murder. On February 27th, prosecutors call a new witness to the stand.
Pam has a best friend of hers, Laura Chapman, who is the prosecution's surprise witness.
After Ron Young's trial and he's convicted, Laura Chapman comes forward.
She says, you know, Pam told me before Gary was murdered that when they were having marital problems, that Pam should just hire a hitman and take him out. That became sort of the smoking gun of Pam Phillips' trial.
However, the defense argues that none of it proves Pam is guilty of murder.
They could never really place her at the scene of the crime, you know, so they have to link her to Ron, and they have to link her through emails and things that can be interpreted differently.
In fact, Pam's attorneys have their own theory about who killed Gary.
The whole defense was geared toward this dead billionaire in Tucson that had a beef with Gary Triano.
The person we think was involved with this case was a guy named Neil McNeese. Neil McNeese had been threatening to kill Gary Triano for a number of years. We all know as trial lawyers that if you do a third-party culpability, it's your story versus the state's theory of the case. It's not about reasonable doubt anymore. It's about whose theory the jury believes.
As the jury deliberates, it's anyone's guess which story they will believe.
You're always nervous about whether or not you were able to come up with enough evidence that the jury would agree with your theory of the case.
On April 8th, 2014, they return with their verdict.
She's guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and first-degree murder. And her sentence is natural life in prison, which in Arizona means that's life without parole.
It wasn't until we got the verdict that I breathed a sigh of relief. That was probably the most gratification that most homicide detectives get on a case.
Gary's children were there, his ex-wife was there, his brother, and there was just this sense of relief. I mean, after almost 2 decades, they finally felt that they got some measure of justice.
An insatiable desire for the finer things in life had driven Pam to gamble on the perfect murder. Instead, she'd lost everything.
There was, I think, some sadness that Pam Phillips, she didn't have to do this. She was not destitute by any means.
Pam orchestrated this murder absolutely out of revenge, but also just plain and simple greed. She was told that she was going to live a lavish lifestyle, be part of the rich and famous, be this elite socialite. It just sort of epitomized the ugly side of American greed. You know, what would somebody do for money?
She was a wealthy businesswoman in love with a ranch hand.
Kathleen was a very well-respected businesswoman in Vail. Everybody liked her.
He loved to laugh, and he just was a good time to be around.
Until their Western-style romance went dangerously wrong.
Please help him. He doesn't deserve to die.
And it's up to investigators to unravel the truth.
He told her that he was a hitman and had killed 32 people.
Guns and drugs is a very dangerous cocktail.
That was the point of no return.
June 27th, 2002. It's a quiet Thursday afternoon in rural Colorado when an Eagle County 911 operator gets a call from a local businesswoman named Kathleen Denson.
She had called 911 to report that she had just shot her boyfriend.
I think it does.
Kathy, you have the gun in your hand.
No, it's on the table.
Kathy, where was he shot?
In his heart. Please help him. He doesn't deserve to die.
Kathy says the victim is her ex-boyfriend, Gerald Cody Boyd, and claims the shooting was in self-defense.
While on the line with 911, Kathleen Denson was nearly hysterical. She didn't want Cody Boyd to die. She did tell the dispatcher that he was demanding money from her, but she was almost hysterical with the fear that he would die.
Police and paramedics are immediately dispatched to Denson's home, located on a sprawling 77-acre horse ranch in Eagle, Colorado.
Vail is about 15 miles up the river from Eagle. It's a very rich ski town.
I was at the sheriff's office at the time that the call came in, so I was actually one of the first officers on scene. As we're approaching the scene, there's a lot of things going through your mind as an officer. Is she still armed? Are there any other people in the residence? Any dangers that we need to be aware of as we're going up to that?
Officers find Kathy outside, still on the phone with 911.
I'll never forget the scene as going in. You could still smell the discharge of the firearm. You can smell the burnt black powder as you enter the residence. And then we went in and discovered the body in the living room. Mr. Boyd was laying on his back when I walked in. He was lifeless, and I could tell what appeared to be a gunshot wound on the left side of his chest.
It's already too late. He is found dead at the scene.
The first thing that I was curious about was what her story was.
There were absolutely no signs of a struggle that we were able to determine at the scene. There was no indication that she had any injuries whatsoever.
Investigators can't help but wonder if there was more to the story than Kathy will admit. From the beginning, Kathleen and Cody's relationship had been unconventional. He was just a simple cowboy, but Kathy had been born into money as the daughter of a successful Colorado furrier.
Her father started that company. She inherited it and grew it.
There's no doubt that Kathleen Denson was a very well-respected businesswoman in Vail. She ran the first store, and everybody liked her.
She actually had not just the store in Vail that was very successful. She had 2 shops in Aspen, which is about 100 miles away. That was a very successful operation, made her a lot of money, and her shops were known for very high-quality merchandise.
But while selling furs became her profession, horses had always been her passion.
Kathleen was also known by the quarter horse set because she had a lovely 77-acre quarter horse ranch, Dragon A.
She was raising quarter horses. That's not a cheap hobby, so I assume that she was doing very well.
Her ranch, I'm sure, was quite well known, and her breeding operation was quite well known. It was her first stores that made her a wealthy woman. If she had positive income from the ranch, that was a big plus.
In the late 90s, she'd hired Cody Boyd to help her run the place.
He had bounced around the valley already 3 or 4 years here, and he had had odd jobs.
What I can remember about Cody Boyd is he had a strong personality. He also liked to have a good time.
He had a bit of a reputation as a ladies' man because apparently he was charming as hell. He just had this kind of just lovely Western drawl, and he had a twinkle in his eye, and he loved pulp stories, and he loved to laugh, and he just was a good time to be around.
Cody had been on the job for a few years when he divorced his wife. Soon after, their relationship became more than just professional.
It quickly developed into a romantic relationship. And then she provided for him, both as a handyman as well as her boyfriend.
As the story goes, he eventually went from the bunkhouse out to the ranch house and started living with Kathleen. Here's a wealthy, beautiful woman with money and land. It must have been an incredibly tempting situation for Cody Boyd.
In some cases, it's the allure and the mystery, the unknown, of really an opposite. So in some cases, the most passionate, fiery love affairs are born of these very different backgrounds.
Despite their differences, Kathy and Cody seemed to be happy together. So how had their romance ended? And why had it resulted in bloodshed?
It's hard to say exactly when things began to go south between Cody Boyd and Kathleen Denson. Cody Boyd convinced Kathleen Denson that he really, really loved her. That's completely at odds with the picture that emerged in the investigation.
Coming up, investigators uncover ties between the victim and organized crime.
Boyd was gregarious, articulate, friendly, but he absolutely had a dark side.
Sheriff's deputies near Vail, Colorado have arrested local businesswoman Kathy Denson for killing her ex-boyfriend, 45-year-old Cody Boyd.
We had a body laying inside the residence. We knew we had a person who claims to have shot the person that's laying inside the residence. So the first thing we got to do is we got to secure that scene.
One of the first things that seems out of place is the murder weapon itself.
She had set the gun down actually on the table in the kitchen.
It was an unusual weapon that she used. It was a black powder gun.
That's one of the oddest things about the Denson case. This was a replica of a 19th century black powder pistol. Hardly the most effective murder weapon out there.
Because it makes a lot of smoke when you shoot them, and there's a recoil, and you have to cock it by the hammer to shoot it, and it's kind of fun to play old-time cowboy and load them and that sort of thing.
It wasn't what you would have used had you had any kind of prior notice that you'd have to defend yourself. In fact, it might have been the last weapon you'd use in that particular home.
But the antique pistol was powerful enough to kill Cody Boyd almost instantly.
Make no mistake about it, that is a very deadly firearm.
Mr. Boyd was laying on his back when I walked in. He was lifeless, and I could tell that what appeared to be a gunshot wound on the left side of his chest.
There was no signs of any struggle or any mark other than the gigantic gaping wound of the half-inch metal ball that killed him.
That bullet pushed through almost, I would say, 12 inches or more of bone and flesh.
Investigators find no evidence of a struggle.
As far as around Mr. Boyd, the decedent, We didn't locate anything of suspicious activity around him. There was no other weapons, nothing else that we had found indicating that Mr. Boyd was armed or anything like that.
To get a better sense of Cody and Kathleen's relationship, detectives speak to friends and other employees.
In interviewing the hired hands there at the ranch and also interviewing neighbors, we're talking to those folks to try to help us paint the picture of what kind of person she is, what kind of person Mr. Boyd is.
They discover that the romance had been over for a while now, and money seems to have been the root of the problem.
As far as we know, Cody Boyd had nothing when he came to know Kathleen Denson. He really fit the role of the misfit, the ne'er-do-well, not someone who was successful in life.
The word was that she had paid about $100,000 worth of his business expenses.
Kathleen had purchased like a motorcycle for Cody, had purchased a semi for Cody. I believe there was a Corvette that was purchased as well. But things started going south.
Friends also point to the drastic differences in the couple's personalities. While Kathy was quiet and reserved, Cody was larger than life and liked to tell stories about his checkered past.
Boyd bragged incessantly about his claim that in his prior life he was a mafia hitman. And he certainly had the guns and ammo to make that seem convincing.
The sheriffs discovered on the ranch a big gun safe. And in the gun safe, there were at least half a dozen high-powered semi-automatic weapons.
You didn't have to be a very good shot. You just had to hold the trigger down and let the 20 rounds per second be expelled from your firearm. A nasty, nasty set of guns, to be sure.
In fact, it turned out Cody had purchased the antique pistol that killed him.
And it was a Christmas gift to Kathleen, who was living out on the ranch, from Boyd. And that's one of the great ironies of this. This was not a modern firearm. And even an original black powder pistol has a significant percentage of misfires. This is not a safe firearm to be firing, let alone being fired at.
It doesn't seem like the kind of weapon one might choose if they were planning to commit murder, which supports Kathy's story. The medical examiner's autopsy report is also in her favor.
The evidence was pretty clear that he was high on cocaine, and the evidence that she would be legitimately afraid of this man with whom she'd had a long-term romantic relationship.
Cocaine is a stimulant, and it acts on the reward center of the brain, the pleasure center of the brain. So the combination of euphoria with impulsivity and the reduction of the ability to put the brakes on can be a really dangerous combination.
Guns and drugs is a very dangerous cocktail.
It seems to be a clear-cut case of self-defense, until a new witness steps forward with a different story to tell. Coming up, Kathy is betrayed by one of her closest friends.
She wanted to let us know that Kathleen Denson is not who a lot of people think that she is.
After the first day of the investigation, it looks like modern-day cowboy Cody Boyd was killed by Kathy Denson in self-defense. However, Colorado police are about to learn that his ex-girlfriend's motives might not have been so innocent after all.
So what became apparent as we continued with this investigation was that it appeared that this was some sort of a love triangle. We knew that they were boyfriend-girlfriend, but then there's also this third person that comes into the picture, Monica Seebacher. She goes by Monique.
Monique was I believe a manager for the Vail store and was an employee of Kathleen's for several years.
Kathleen and Monique were basically also best of friends, and that certainly Kathleen confided in Monique.
However, it seems that friendship had been stretched to the breaking point. And when Monique learns about the shooting, she comes forward to tell Eagle County investigators what she knows.
She was a very forthcoming witness and wanted to be able to tell her side of the story. She wanted to let us know that Kathleen Denson is not who a lot of people think that she is.
He was in love with me, and things just, started escalating from there.
Monique Seebacher said that the reason why Kathleen Denson shot and killed Cody Boyd was because Cody loved Monique and not Kathy Denson. Now, whether that was true, I don't know.
According to Monique, her relationship with Cody began after Kathy kicked him out of the house.
2 years ago, Kathleen told me that her and Cody were having problems, and I had a 2-bedroom condo. She asked me if he could stay there while, maybe they work some things out.
It turned out to be a little bit of a disaster because Kathleen still loved Cody Boyd. And yet here she is shoving him out of the ranch and into the arms of another woman.
She wanted things to work out between them. And instead, he started a relationship with her friend.
The relationship between Seebacher and Boyd was certainly something that she wasn't thrilled about.
Monique says she tried to preserve her friendship with Kathy, but it was clear that she was still in love with Cody and unwilling to let him move on.
Certainly, Kathleen confided in Monique. I think the evidence showed Monique that wasn't always that straightforward and confiding everything back in Kathleen.
It made things very awkward for Kathleen.
Beyond the exterior, which she was effective, she was savvy, she ran a good business, was I would have to say, a pretty tortured personality and soul, and pretty conflicted.
Monique explains that because both she and Cody depended on Kathy for their livelihoods, they tried their best to keep their romance a secret. She confesses that Kathy's generosity came with other perks as well.
All three of them had pretty strong drug habits, particularly with the drug of choice in the glitzy ski resorts, that being cocaine. And she, Kathleen, had the money to keep them well supplied. Basically, she's supporting him and his drug habit, giving him lavish gifts.
She bought him a car, guns. He basically had money to do whatever he wanted.
But all along, what Cody really wanted was Monique.
For Boyd, he had the best of both worlds. He had a woman that he was getting money from and another woman who seemed to dote on him. It must have been an incredibly tempting situation for Cody Boyd.
Monique questioned him, "Why are you still going to see Kathleen?" And he says, "It's just really hard for me to break up with her after all these years." That's pretty unusual, that kind of relationship, and the people involved, they're different. They're definitely different.
Monique says the beginning of the end came a few weeks before the shooting, when Kathleen asked her to help pick out an engagement ring.
There was a lot of talk of marriage, even to the extent that Kathleen had bought Cody a ring and she was going to or getting ready to propose.
Seebacher was a friend, at least that's how Kathleen considered her, and so it made things very awkward.
But the situation grew even more awkward when Kathy confided that she was planning a romantic getaway with Cody to pop the question.
Kathleen wanted to go with Cody to Cancun on a holiday trip. And Cody says, "If Monique cannot go with me and you, I'm not going to Cancun." So Kathleen was forced into kind of taking Monique.
Coming up, it's a tropical vacation none of them would ever forget.
The three of them agreed to go as a group to Cancun, and that's when things really fell apart.
As Colorado detectives untangle the love triangle between Cody Boyd, Monique Seebacher, and Kathy Denson, they begin to realize that Kathy had plenty of motive to kill her former lover. But what would she have to say about her best friend's accusations?
We wanted to find out exactly what happened. What are the circumstances that led up to this, and what led you, the suspect, to shoot the person that ultimately died? And so that's what we were trying to do as far as interviewing Ms. Denson, to get her side of the story, to help put the pieces of this puzzle together.
Under interrogation by Colorado police, Kathy asks for her attorneys and gives them little. But friends present a slightly different story from Monique's.
Kathleen Denson struggled with cocaine use during the period of time that she was with Cody Boyd, and that was part of the problem with him. Everyone wants to be loved, and Cody Boyd convinced Kathleen Denson that he really, really loved her. More and more, Cody Boyd was not just asking for things like a Corvette or a Harley. He was insisting on Kathleen giving him huge sums of money, and that really opened her eyes to what he was really all about.
But drug use and extravagant spending weren't the only dangerous things about him.
He told her that he was a hitman and had killed 32 people and was a bad hombre.
Kathleen Denson was looking for love in the wrong place, because Cody Boyd was trouble from the get-go.
At first, Cody's bad boy act was a turn-on for Kathy. It wasn't until their trip to Cancun that she realized just how terrifying he could be.
If somebody is highly invested in being an outlaw or a bad boy, then citing gun ownership or citing violence that they may have perpetrated demonstrates to another person that they've attained this level of expertise or competence in their so-called domain.
Kathy financed the luxurious trip and says that when she agreed to bring Monique with them, she didn't know Cody had ulterior motives.
The trip to Cancun was between Monique, Cody, and Kathleen. And during that trip is when Kathleen had started to realize that there was a relationship going on between Cody and Monique.
She brought a ring to Cancun to propose marriage, and he had turned her down.
It would have been horrible to find out that your boyfriend, your lover, is with your best friend when you took them on vacation with you.
She could no longer deny or explain in her own mind the fact that she was really not the love object of Cody.
Once you discover that you would feel betrayed.
But the trip had ended in far more than just a broken heart.
In Cancun, there was a heated argument, and according to Kathleen Denson, she was beaten up by Cody Boyd, flew back to Denver, and stayed basically in isolation because she didn't want to see anybody, and she didn't want anybody to see her blackened eyes and her very, very injured face.
She wanted things to work out between them. And instead, he started a relationship with her friend and with someone that worked for her. Someone who at some point in time was considered a confidant to her. And she had enough.
That was really the breaking point. That was the point of no return for Kathleen Denson.
When they returned to the U.S., Cody finally left the ranch and moved in with Monique. She was doing her best to move on from the betrayal when he unexpectedly showed up at her doorstep on June 27th.
On the day of the shooting, Kathleen Denson dropped her vehicle in town. She intended to take her 4Runner out on the road. She wanted to get some windshield time, some time for herself, and she enjoyed driving. When she got back to the ranch, it wasn't too long before Cody Boyd entered and began to threaten her.
Kathleen has said that he was trying to coerce her to give her another $300,000.
Fearing for her life, Kathy reached for something to defend herself with and wound up grabbing the antique pistol he'd given her. But in light of what they've learned so far, investigators find Kathy's version of events difficult to believe.
There were a number of different things that just didn't make sense in regards to what she was saying.
Cody was moving out his things from Kathleen's ranch and moving them into Monique's because he was going to live full-time with Monique. He didn't bring a weapon. He didn't have a gun.
On July 1st, 2002, 5 days after Cody's death, Eagle County prosecutors decide to formally charge Kathy Denson with second-degree murder.
This was the first homicide that I had investigated where there was this love triangle, and it just really muddies the water because there's so many different moving pieces.
I had concerns with a lot of people's credibility in the case. And that was an obstacle that we had to figure out, okay, what do we know versus what people exaggerate.
Coming up, the prosecution is betting that the evidence will prove their case. But will it be enough to get a conviction?
It was clear that she was a woman who was both terrified of the fact that she was charged with murder and horrified by the fact that she had had to commit murder.
"45-year-old millionaire Kathy Denson has been charged with murdering her ex-boyfriend Cody Boyd. If convicted, Kathy faces up to 48 years behind bars, but her attorneys seem confident she will be acquitted.
The prosecutors had an enormous burden. They had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Kathleen Denson did not act in self-defense. And from my perspective, the deck was stacked in favor of the defense.
He entered the home angry, came at her, and she picked up the black powder gun that just happened to be in the room and shot him. And it ended up killing him.
Based on the evidence, however, prosecutors are convinced Kathy wasn't motivated by fear. She was out for revenge.
He wasn't grabbing your neck. He wasn't brandishing a heavy object. They were having a heated conversation. Does that give one a license to kill somebody because you have an argument in your house and you are able to shoot them dead in the middle of the afternoon?
We had to show that there was a reason for the murder, that there was motive. But then at the same time, we also had to show that this also was not justified murder.
Prosecutors say that evidence taken during a search of Kathy's ranch house supports their case.
There was drug paraphernalia in the residence. There were a lot of videos that we had to go through.
There was a video of them snorting some drugs, we presume cocaine.
What got more publicity was the exotic gun collection and these videotapes that Cody and Kathleen made of themselves engaged in various sexual activities.
There was no indication of any type of violence being used. It looked very consensual, very caring.
The prosecution believes Kathy was still desperately in love with Cody.
The picture that was being painted was that Kathleen was a scorned ex-lover. She was not happy with Mr. Boyd. She had given him all these things to try to win his love, and she was just very upset. And then he came back that day. Kathleen just couldn't stand the thought of Cody not being with her anymore.
And while Kathy claims that Cody had a history of violence, the truth is he'd been lying to her from the start.
Cody Boyd was known to say a number of different things, grandizing himself maybe more than what he really was. It was something to take note of, but there was absolutely no evidence that he was any type of mafia hitman or hitman at all.
I'm not aware of any prior criminal history on his part. I'm not saying he didn't have any, but if he did, it certainly wasn't significant enough to leave an impression on us.
One of his kinks was trying to get respect as a feared hitman when there was zero evidence to show he had anything to do with that.
Prosecutors argue that because Cody posed no actual threat, Kathy never had a reason to shoot him.
She had no injuries. There was no indication that she had been in a struggle or that she was in fear.
And interestingly, Kathleen never claimed. She said he kept coming at me. I was frightened. She never claimed there was any physical contact between the two.
And ballistics evidence from the scene appears to prove the distance between them.
When a gun fires, it creates stippling from the burning gunpowder. He had stippling from below his knees, on his pants, up on his face, to the top of his head. That means that the cone of burning gunpowder was in excess of 4 feet.
The prosecution noted that there were 2 doors that Kathleen could have fled out of instead of picking up the revolver and shooting the guy.
They believe that once Kathy had made her choice, her intent was clear: to kill the man who betrayed her.
Kathleen Denson was not a stranger to firearms, but was hardly an expert markswoman. At the distance that she had to fire that black powder pistol, it would have been hard to miss center mass, and that's what she aimed for.
She took a very drastic course of action for which there was no coming back.
However, Kathy sticks to her claim of self-defense, and her attorneys argue that it doesn't matter whether Cody presented any actual danger. For her, perception was reality.
Kathleen Denson really believed that Cody Boyd was a hitman, maybe in a prior life, or maybe even then. Mostly, she knew he was the kind of guy that wouldn't hesitate to hurt her. He'd already done it in Cancun.
Mr. Robinson's theory was clearly that Boyd was attacking her and was about to commit or had committed a crime against her.
Coming up, the defense's argument gets put to the test.
It was a self-defense case involving a woman who was scared to death of a man who was in her home. What defense lawyer wouldn't want a case like that?
Prosecutors in Eagle County, Colorado have finished arguing their case for murder. Now it's the defense's turn to convince the jury that Kathy Denson only shot Cody Boyd to save her own life. Their argument hinges on the state's home defense statute, known as the Make My Day Law.
Under that law, Kathleen Denson had a right to use deadly force, even if all that would have happened would be getting beaten up again by Cody Boyd. She didn't have to let him hurt her before she could use deadly force.
Over the course of their relationship, Cody had built himself up as a dangerous hitman, so Kathy had every reason to believe he would kill her.
He had military-style weapons. He had conversions of automatic and semi-automatic weapons. He had the large banana clips. He was everybody's nightmare in a world where mass shootings have become all too commonplace. An astronomic number of firearms were in the home.
Some of them were altered to be fully automatic weapons.
To prove their point, the defense makes a surprising move, asking Kathy to describe what happened in her own words.
Kathleen's attorney, Scott Robinson, put Kathleen on the stand, which is pretty unusual in a murder trial because, you could say something wrong and cook your own goose.
When Kathleen testified, she was impeccably dressed. Very attractive woman, very poised, articulate.
Appearance, dress, manner of speech, the way somebody wears their hair, the number of ums that they say. All of these things can impact jurors' perception of the credibility of a witness.
Kathy testifies that when Cody Boyd showed up at the ranch that day, he was enraged and also appeared to be high.
Cody Boyd had really wretched teeth, and Kathleen had agreed to pay for a complete restoration. Boyd was showed in the bill $20,000, and he was quite upset. She's immediately frightened because he looks crazed. He looks angry. He demands money.
One of the defense's pathologists did an autopsy on his own of Cody and found cocaine, and they found a sleep drug, I think halcyon, and they found, I think, THC from marijuana. And the pathologist said, these drugs could cause some people to get hostile.
He was in a drug-induced rage and was coming at her.
The fact that he claimed to have a darker past certainly played a factor.
The defense argues that whether Kathy intended to kill him or not, Cody had left her with little choice.
The defense felt that Mr. Boyd was coming down there, was being hostile and aggressive towards Miss Denson, and she felt no other recourse other than to defend herself.
Oftentimes, emotions will lead to immediate behavioral responses on people's parts. So there's no cooling off period. There's no time to think and to let the emotion calm down.
The timeline was easily established because he had just been at the dentist. We know exactly when the 911 call went in. So there really wasn't much of a delay between Boyd arriving at the ranch and Boyd receiving the fatal shot. Cody Boyd was high, he was angry, and he was going to go get what he had coming. Of course, as things turned out, he got exactly what he had coming.
But would the jury agree?
It was a very stone-faced jury. They were very hard to read.
The jury has a tough job to do. They're weighing somebody's life in their hands, and, they have to go with the information that was given here.
After only 2 hours, they return with their verdict. To the surprise of many, they find Kathy Denson not guilty.
The jury decided that she did not commit a crime, but it was a homicide. It was a death caused by another person.
Whether the jury acquitted Kathleen Denson because of the Make My Day statute or the self-defense statute or some combination of both, we'll never know.
Only 2 people were there that actually know exactly how it transpired. One of them was dead.
Everybody went home that day except for Cody.
It's a tragic case. It's tragic because I think a lot of people didn't feel that justice was served.
What began as the unlikely romance between a wealthy rancher and an itinerant cowboy has ended in betrayal and bloodshed. But the question remains, who is ultimately to blame?
Miss Seebacher, when she took the stand, there were a lot of inconsistencies with what she had said. So, it painted to the jury that she was not very credible, that, maybe she's a scorned person in this particular case. So I'm trying to seek revenge on Miss Denson.
The people who knew Kathleen Denson believed in her. There was no backlash. The impact on Kathleen Denson was a lot more subtle. Quite frankly, she has never gotten over the trauma of shooting and killing Cody Boyd.
They were two overprotective mothers who'd do anything for their children.
Both appeared to have a lot in common, kids the same age, family people.
You can call them helicopter parents or tiger moms. They both had very hands-on parenting styles.
But when they turn their defensive instincts on one another, the results are deadly.
There was a lot of hatred between these two families. There is yelling, screaming. He says, she stabbed her, she stabbed her.
And investigators are left to determine who's to blame in the suburban feud gone wrong.
It was just like, how did this come about?
Both of these moms seem capable of just about anything.
Wednesday, April 27th, 2005. School has just let out in the Cleveland, Ohio suburb of Euclid when police receive a call about a domestic disturbance in progress.
I was in my office and we monitor all the calls through a scanner. At that time, we heard that there was a big fight on Crystal Avenue.
According to the caller, all hell had broken loose at the house next door to him. 15 people had engaged in a fight. They were literally outside duking it out.
Officers are dispatched to handle the altercation. But while they are en route, a second and more urgent call comes in.
There is yelling, screaming. The 911 operator can't hear most of what he's saying, but is getting enough down to when he says, she stabbed her, she stabbed her.
When the police got there, the scene was total chaos. A dozen men and women throwing punches at each other, literally a battle between two families.
I saw one lady laying down by the driveway. Looked like there was some type of problem going on with her. There was someone else over top of her, and all the other people were just milling around.
My sister talking about she can't breathe. I'm lifting up her shirt. I'm not a paramedic. I don't know what to do. I don't know whether to hold her chest or whatever. I just see the blood coming out. And I just see her eyes just going blank.
She needed medical attention right away, or else she was going to basically bleed out.
Police clear a path for EMTs to treat the unconscious woman. It appears she's been stabbed several times, but she's not the only victim.
As the EMTs were putting her into the ambulance, they noticed that the woman helping her was also bleeding.
I didn't know I was stabbed until the EMT said, take off your jacket, let me check your body. And they checked and saw that I was stabbed in my back too. So I get in the ambulance and I'm riding to the hospital, and I look down the street and the ambulance with my sister just stopped on the street. I'm like, what did they stop for? I guess she had stopped breathing.
The wounded woman identifies herself as 29-year-old Christina Barkley. The unconscious woman is her little sister, 20-year-old Vanessa McMorrick.
Vanessa was an irritating little girl growing up. She followed me around everywhere, just irritating and tattleteller. But as she got older, me and her got closer, you know. She was everybody's best friend. She's like the glue that kept everybody together.
Christina's daughter, Diamond, was especially close to her aunt.
I could talk to my auntie Vanessa about anything. Whenever I had a problem in school or with my mom or anything, she was the person I can go to and talk to. Anytime we threw parties, she was the one that planned it and was the first one there. She loved getting her hair done. So she was over our house all the time because my mother did her hair. She was just beautiful inside and out.
Few things were more important to Vanessa than family. So after high school, she began making plans to start one of her own.
She worked in a clothing store in nearby Cleveland, and she was able to get an apartment. Shortly after, she met a man named Robert. They started dating, and not too long after they started dating, she learned she was pregnant. Vanessa's big sister, Christina, already had children, but they both ended up being pregnant at the same time, so it was just one more thing that they could bond over as sisters.
They both had mood swings out of this world during the entire pregnancy. She was there almost every single day, and I'll never forget when she actually went into labor. My mom was right there. She had her baby 2 months before I did. She didn't have that many friends. It was just family. It was just us all day long. If she wasn't at my house, she was at my other sister's house. We were just together all the time.
The extended family included Christina's husband, Michael, and their 5 children. Their home on Crystal Avenue was always bustling with activity.
Diamond was 12. Jonathan was 13. Zariana, she was about 5. And Zamian, he was 3. And Ozias was like 4 months old. He was a little newborn baby.
Between their kids, aunts, uncles, cousins, family coming over, it was just a very busy place.
So busy, in fact, that when their new neighbors, the Bergers, moved in next door, Christina barely even noticed.
Ashley Berger was, I believe, 32 years old and had moved to Crystal Avenue in June of 2005. She had 4 children. She lived there with her common-law husband.
I knew of them. I knew it was a mom. I knew it was a guy that lived with her, and I knew she had beautiful kids. I was in my own little world with my own little family. I didn't need no new friends.
Both families seemed content to live their lives in peace. But just a year later, their neighborhood would become a battleground. While Christina and Vanessa are rushed to the hospital, police try to defuse the situation between the 2 families.
Crystal Avenue is a really decent area to raise a family. It's kind of a bedroom community.
These are 2 suburban families that have gotten into this fight. I mean, these aren't gang members.
Coming up, investigators learn the history between the 2 families and discover how young love sparked a dangerous feud.
Yeah, he had a little crush on me, and I kind of, told him off.
Christina Barkley and her sister Vanessa are being rushed to the hospital after a brawl with their neighbors left both of them stabbed. But before an investigation can begin, authorities first have to pry the 2 families apart.
The screaming and yelling and invectives and swearing and everything that was going on, it was at its peak then. So they had to calm everything down. The way they do that is they put people in different areas where they can't, rile or incite other people.
While officers try to keep the peace, Detective Ken Kosinski is assigned to the case.
I had to talk to, hopefully, both victims that were up there and get their statement on what happened. When I got to the hospital, Vanessa they're working on her. She's unable to speak or anything.
Vanessa was stabbed 7 times. One of those stabs went through the lung and through the pulmonary artery, which essentially caused her to bleed out. She was also stabbed in the left arm, which severed the muscle, which rendered her arm useless.
While they're operating on Vanessa, detectives speak to Christina to find out what happened.
I went over, talked with her, and she gave me a statement on what had occurred and everything. And she said that she didn't even know she was stabbed. She thought that she just got hit in the back with something. She was a mess. She had the stab wound in her back, scratch marks on her face, but she was able to talk and she was in pretty good health, considering
Christina is able to identify her attacker immediately. She says it's Ashley Berger, her neighbor, that came after them with a knife.
Christina says this wasn't just a random act of violence. There's been a history of tension between their two families, and it all started with a case of unrequited love.
Christina had a daughter named Diamond, and Ashley had a son named Deontay who was about the same age.
So our kids went to the same school. They was in Euclid Middle School. They 12 or 13, but this was a big kid. He didn't look his age. Neither did his cousin. Neither one of them looked their age. Meanwhile, I got two little skinny kids, that was way smaller than him.
According to Christina, the trouble began when Ashley's teenage son Deontay made it clear he wanted Christina's daughter Diamond to go out with him.
We were in the same grade. I guess, he had a little crush on me, and I didn't like boys, so of course I kind of, told him off. Like, I don't want that, I'm not ready for that. She's 12. She ain't about to date nobody. So he can crush all he want, but it's not going to happen. So after she turned him down, this is when everything started happening. So, of course, then he got upset and didn't want to play with us anymore and stuff like that. Next thing we know, he started picking on us. He would bully Jonathan, my son, and Diamond, my daughter. Every day, coming home from school, going to school, he would just do really horrible stuff to my kids. This one day, we were at the bus stop waiting for the bus, and he took a snowball, it wasn't even a snowball, it was more like ice, and he threw it at my face.
Christina tells police that's when she finally decided to confront Ashley Berger about her son.
I go knock on her door, and I try to talk to her. It wasn't a good conversation. I can't even recall what she said, but it wasn't good.
The boy's mother just did not believe that he was capable of that.
Since Ashley refused to do anything, Christina took matters into her own hands.
My mom did go to the school and talk to the teachers. She actually tried to get us both out of the school and go to a different school. They wouldn't do it. I talked to the principal. All he can say is keep them away from each other. They ride the same bus. So there was no way of keeping these kids away from each other, especially if we lived next door.
With the school declining to intervene, the bad blood between the families continued to grow.
There was an incident back in February of 2005. Ashley punched Christina in the face.
Her son came home one day from school and told his mother that my kids was bullying him. She came over, and I couldn't talk to her at that moment because I was with the baby. I said, well, hold on, I'll come over to your house in a minute. So I go over into her house. She didn't answer the door. So I see her significant other walking down the street.
So Christina goes over and starts to talk to Ashley's boyfriend about the problems. Ashley did not like that one bit.
She came out and said, get away from my man. Why are you talking to my man? You want him or something? And then hit me in my face with my 2-year-old in my hand. Yes, she did. My 2-year-old fell to the concrete and hit his head on the ground. I'm sorry, world, but
The feud just gets worse from there.
More incidents, more bullying. Christina said that Ashley's family would yell at them every time they were outside.
Calling the police don't help. Going to the school didn't help. Talking to that parent didn't help. My plan was that summer, I was gonna move. I was out of there. And Nessa was moving with me. We was about to get a house together.
Coming up, the neighborhood feud once again erupts into violence.
All I remember is my mom and my aunt were kind of like being pulled by the hair, and I'm literally just standing there crying.
In Euclid, Ohio, 20-year-old mother Vanessa McMorrick is undergoing emergency surgery after being stabbed 7 times. Meanwhile, her sister Christina is giving a statement to police.
When I spoke to Christina, I expected the worst. I expected screaming, crying, unable to speak. She was relatively calm about the whole thing. She was very matter-of-factly, this is what happened. This is what I want to get down. This is what I want to tell you.
April 27th in 2005, 3 days before my birthday. My birthday is April 30th. Getting ready to have a sleepover. My aunt came over we were going to go shopping to get me a birthday outfit because that same weekend that we had the sleepover, we were going to have a party for me. To go pick up Vanessa from her house downtown in Cleveland. And me and her, we went to the grocery store, went grocery shopping, and then I dropped off my nephews at the bus stop so they can walk Diamond and Jonathan home so they wouldn't be picked with.
She warned them to go straight home and to not start anything with Ashley's son.
But when they got back, Ashley and her family were looking to start a fight.
As we pulling up into the driveway, we just see her and 3 carloads of people. And these people just got out the car. And then as we're walking out the car and her boyfriend's on the porch, he jumps over his porch and get in my sister's face. He just saying everything but the right words to her. He is really cussing my little sister out. So it began, they going back and forth, and it just escalated from there.
Despite Christina's earlier attempt to keep their sons apart, the Bergers claim Jonathan had attacked Deontay.
You're just cussing her out. I mean, why you had them kids try to jump my son or something, but nobody tried to jump your son. I went over there and tried to break it up, get away from my sister's face, and he starts pushing me.
The other house started emptying out, and then you had all these people all over the front lawn, wrestling, fighting, hitting, biting, whatever they were doing.
All I remember is my mom and my aunt were kind of being pulled by the hair, and I'm literally just standing there crying. I don't know what to do, and they're just all fighting.
Christina says that's when it must have happened.
I don't even know when or where my sister got stabbed. I can't even recall when I got stabbed. All I know is at the end of it, Ashley Berger done stabbed my sister. I'm like, she got a knife. And it's 20 people piled around me.
Christina said that Ashley ran back inside, but the fight kept on going. She had no idea how badly Vanessa was hurt.
I see my sister laying on the ground. I see my husband, he's on the phone calling 911. Meanwhile, the kids are in the house. Her son is there. Her 1-year-old son is there. You just hear kids just crying and crying from our side. And my sister's just laying on the ground. She's getting heavy in my arms. I couldn't hold her no more.
With Vanessa still in surgery, detectives returned to Crystal Avenue hoping to verify Christina's story.
Christina was certain that Ashley was the one who stabbed them, but her memory of the events was not entirely clear. She even says that she had the knife at one point, so at that point they don't know anything for sure. By the time detectives had gotten to the scene, the officers had calmed everyone down. That was a huge task. There were at least 15 people involved in a knockdown, drag-out fight.
Inside, investigators find their suspect, Ashley Berger.
We didn't know for sure if it was her, but we had a real good idea that it was because everyone was pointing at her. The whole opposite clan was pointing at her as the person that did the stabbing. James Bruning was one of the officers that responded to the scene. He went in there, asked where Ashley was, and people in the house said that she's in the kitchen. So he went in the kitchen area, confronted Ashley there, saw a knife in the sink where she was standing at. He asked her, that's the knife that you used to stab this person? She goes, I don't know.
So unfortunately, Ashley didn't elaborate, and all they could do was take her into custody.
We took photos of the inside of the house, where we found the knife at. We took it, bagged it, and then we were going to send it to Bureau of Criminal Investigation out in Richfield, Ohio. They do some follow-up investigations. They do testing on forensics and stuff like that. We would want somebody to test it that has better equipment than we have.
It will take several days for the test results to come back. And in the meantime, police are finding it difficult to get a clear picture of what happened from the other participants.
Basically, it was conflicting statements as to what happened, who was involved, who got stabbed, who was doing the stabbing, and everything like that. So at that point in time, we decided, all right, we're going to make everyone fill out a statement form, take everybody into the police station.
Coming up, investigators discover there's more to the story than what they've been told so far.
From the Berger's perspective, it was Christina and her family that was the problem.
There were 34 reported incidents.
It's been a little over an hour since 20-year-old Vanessa McMorrick and her sister Christina were rushed to the hospital with multiple stab wounds. Their neighbor, Ashley Berger, has been named as the assailant, but police still have no proof.
When we got everybody to the police station, we separated everyone because we didn't want anyone to start fighting or wrestling. We had a couple interview rooms, and so that's where they sat. And most of the people really weren't too loud after they were at the police station. I think they realized they're just going to have to make the statements and submit to whatever happens after that.
With so many people to interview, the police decide to divide and conquer. They start to collect statements from one family to compare to statements of the other.
And what Ashley's family told police was very different from what they'd heard so far.
Ashley Berger was a 32-year-old female who had moved to Crystal Avenue in 2005. She had 4 children, and she lived there with Matt, who was her boyfriend, and the father of 2 of the children.
She had no criminal history. She was a stay-at-home mom. She had a kind of quiet, calm demeanor. She just didn't seem like the kind of person who was capable of this kind of violence.
Ashley would say that she really didn't want bad blood. They were her next-door neighbors. She was happy to have a nice place to live with her children.
From the Berger's perspective, it was Christina and her family that was the problem. Police records reflected that Ashley had called the department several times to seek assistance. Ashley claimed it was her son that was being bullied by Christina's kids and not the other way around.
Ashley claimed that after she reported the harassment, Christina became more and more combative.
In February of 2005, where Ashley punched Christina in the face over some dispute between the children. And she actually admitted to it, but indicated she felt threatened.
To hear Ashley tell it, it was Christina's family that were the violent ones. They were the ones shouting threats and slurs.
And those threats soon escalated into acts of vandalism.
Ashley stated that in March, she placed these stick-type markers along her property line so that there would be a clear demarcation. She wanted to keep Christina's kids off of her property.
Ashley filed a police report claiming that her son saw Christina's husband kick those markers down.
Euclid is a community of about 50,000 people. They have a very good police force. They've responded to these incidents. They certainly want to try to resolve any sort of conflicts that occur. The officers had spoke to both families, left, and as far as they knew, everything had settled down.
Police may have considered the matter resolved, but the truth was, neither mother seemed willing to back down.
Investigators were looking at these incident reports, and it just demonstrated that there was so much back and forth between these two families. None of it was shedding any light on what really happened. What these reports did tell them was that both of these mothers were extremely overprotective of their children, and they would be willing to do just about anything.
Ashley's family tells detectives things got so bad, she even tried to get a restraining order against Christina's family.
The indication was that the prosecutor would be in contact and they were going to try to mediate this or try to work with them to try to resolve these sort of conflicts that were going on. For whatever reason, they didn't seem to want to compromise. Each stood their ground, and that's the way it was going to be.
The only thing both families seem to agree on is what caused the fight. But investigators still don't have a clear account of what happened. And the one person who might be able to tell them isn't talking.
The only two people who were involved in the fight that hadn't given statements yet were Vanessa and Ashley. Since they had Ashley in custody, they decided to make another run at her. But before they could do that, they got some bad news.
I received the call that Vanessa had passed. She had bled out.
Once they was done stitching me up, the doctor came in and told me there was nothing he can do. She passed away. I couldn't even see her body. I just had to leave the hospital.
This meant that there was no longer an assault charge, and Ashley was potentially looking at a first-degree murder charge.
Both families are immediately informed of Vanessa's death.
We lived right down the street from the police station, like right down the street. And I'll never forget it. When she came home, me and my mom sat on the stairs and we just talked. She said my aunt had passed away, and we all just broke down, and it's never been the same since.
The other family was kind of taken back, basically. I think they were a little shocked at the whole thing, too. I don't think they expected what happened to happen.
But Ashley Berger has the most surprising reaction of all.
When they told her at the Euclid Police Department that Vanessa had succumbed to her wounds, she blurted out, "I didn't mean to do it."
She goes, "Oh my God, I didn't mean to kill her."
It's the first time that she said anything to them since they picked her up. Whether she meant it or not, it amounts to an admission of guilt, so they arrest her.
We had her processed through the jail, photographs, fingerprints, and all that.
Coming up, Ashley drops another bombshell.
She was 5 months pregnant at the time.
Ashley Berger has just implicated herself in the stabbing death of 20-year-old Vanessa McMorrick. And Euclid police already have statements from the victim's family confirming Ashley was the one who did it.
I spoke with a few people from the Berger side. I don't believe any of them had mentioned anything about the stabbing, but they knew exactly what happened because they were the ones screaming for Ashley to get back in the house. So they knew. Everyone understood. Everyone saw. Except, if I don't say anything, maybe it didn't happen.
At that point, detectives are convinced that Ashley probably just got fed up with Christina and her family, and she just snapped. They're looking to get a full statement from Ashley to wrap up the investigation.
However, after police hear what Ashley has to say, they realize there's more to the story.
The relationship between Ashley Berger and Christina Barkley was massively deteriorating over several months. Things just kept getting worse.
There'd been threats, there'd been hatred because of the police being called. There'd been things said, well, if your son stopped picking on my son, he's younger and he's smaller and everything. You know, he's trying to do the right thing, come home, not get in a fight.
Ashley doesn't deny the bad blood between them, but she claims Christina and Vanessa were the ones who took things too far.
Ashley told police that she tried every legal means at her disposal to protect her children, but she drew the line when they threatened the life of her unborn child.
She was 5 months pregnant at the time of the homicide.
According to Ashley, Christina's family not only knew she was pregnant, they used it as another way to intimidate her.
Ashley didn't look pregnant with a big belly at all, but when you live next door to somebody, you tend to know their business.
The two sisters had allegedly threatened to stomp the baby out of her.
Vanessa kept saying, I'm going to kick that baby out of you.
The fights between the two families had escalated to the point that she was afraid they weren't just threats anymore.
So when Christina's family came into her yard that day, Ashley was determined to protect her baby, no matter what.
On April 27, 2005, around 3 p.m., Ashley Berger called police to say that Christina's nephews were harassing her children.
Ashley claimed that Christina sent her two older nephews to the bus stop to harass her sons and basically threatened to beat him up. The police came and left, but Ashley was so worried she wanted to stay at her parents' house.
But before her parents arrived to pick her up, Ashley says Christina and Vanessa found out she'd called the police on their nephews.
Every time that there was a confrontation or fights on the bus or whatever, Ashley would call the police. This enraged Vanessa and Christina. How dare you call the police on my son, my nephew? They didn't like the fact that police were called to break up fights between school kids.
Christina and Vanessa were ready to have it out with Ashley, but about that time, Ashley's parents got there.
Ashley claims that as her parents arrived, Vanessa and Christina's family started screaming at them. At that point, Ashley's boyfriend, Matt, intervened.
Christina and Vanessa got out of the van and tried to break up the fight between Matt and the nephew. Then the other house started emptying out, and then you had all these people all over the front lawn, wrestling, fighting, hitting, fighting.
Fearing the worst, Ashley grabbed a knife from the kitchen.
Vanessa and Christina came up on the porch, and she just did everything she could to protect what was standing right behind her, her small children, and right inside her, the baby.
Ashley comes busting out of the house with this knife and starts flailing the knife all over the place. Christina grabs the knife, and now she's wrestling with Ashley. Ashley's got a hold of her hair. Somewhere in this melee, Vanessa got stabbed.
If what Ashley says is true, she was acting in self-defense. But there is little evidence to corroborate her story.
Other than the next-door neighbor that made the initial 911 call, none of the other neighbors were willing to come forward and help the police.
The neighbors didn't want to talk. They were afraid. All they kept on saying was, it's just a mess. I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to be dragged into this. And that was basically that, or they wouldn't return the calls. You'd leave your card, make a phone call to them, nothing. And it was just, that was it.
When the test results came back from the knife found in Ashley's kitchen, they're not much help.
There were no fingerprints on the knife. The blood, there was no real blood on it. So it was washed off and it was clean.
There's no doubt that Ashley had the knife. Ashley confessed, but the police have to figure out if it was self-defense or murder.
The strengths were the admission, the finding of the knife immediately afterwards with blood in the sink, the admission I didn't mean to do it when Ashley found out that Vanessa had died. Probably the weaker part is dealing with statements. Everybody had a different story. Each family sort of had their own take on what occurred and what didn't occur. So really we looked at the evidence. That pool of blood in front of the living room window was very telling.
We had enough at that point in time to charge her. There was no more investigation needed. There was nothing else to do.
Prosecutors decide to take the case to a grand jury.
What the state did when they took it to the grand jury, they knew that they had a tough case, and so they had an indictment for voluntary manslaughter and one for involuntary manslaughter.
The defense certainly cross-examined the witnesses for the state cross-examines the witnesses for the defense, and the jury listens to it and makes a determination of credibility.
The grand jury ultimately agrees with the prosecution's case against Ashley Berger. On June 2nd, 2005, they bring indictments for murder and 4 counts of felonious assault.
Ultimately, they decided there was enough evidence to support the charges, so it got scheduled to go to trial.
Coming up, the two families face off for the last time in court.
A woman shouted, "In court, I'm gonna kill Ashley's baby."
"32-year-old Ashley Berger has been charged with the murder of Vanessa McMorrick. But since she is 5 months pregnant, her lawyers argue to postpone the trial.
The court agreed and allowed her to be kept on house arrest until after she gave birth.
On August 29th, 4 months after stabbing her neighbors, Ashley gives birth to a baby girl. And another 3 months later, her trial finally begins.
Even though it had almost been a year, emotions were still running hot between the two families. Deputies were on high alert, constantly monitoring the situation, trying to make sure that another fight didn't erupt. Prosecutors described Ashley as a woman driven by hatred. Ashley had harassed Christina and Vanessa for several months before stabbing them in a fit of rage.
The state points to numerous police records of Ashley's aggressive behavior, as well as the medical reports regarding her victim's injuries.
My sister was stabbed 7 times. She was stabbed, one of them in her arm. She couldn't even move the arm to even save herself.
There were some defensive wounds, but it was the one death stab, if you will, was 3 inches deep. It was well into the chest cavity.
Prosecutors also show the jury photos of the large pool of blood found just outside Ashley's front window.
Ashley was inside when the fight began, but Vanessa was stabbed outside. That meant Ashley made a conscious choice to fight these two women.
I don't think that there was any question about it being self-defense. Ashley was in the house. How could she claim self-defense when she was removed from everything? She came out of the house with the knife, with the intent to hurt somebody with it.
But the defense insists that Ashley was acting in self-defense, and they believe they can prove it.
They used statements given by Ashley's family to the police to support their claim that Christina and Vanessa had been the ones who actually started the fight.
Matt Macenti came there shortly before he got there, there had been a fight between Ashley's son and Vanessa's son. They were picking on him, and he had, I believe, 2 sisters with him. And they get there, and Matthew gets out of the car, and here comes Vanessa. Now, mind you, nothing happens on the property of Christina, not one thing. Everything is on the property of Ashley.
Testimony about Christina and Vanessa's threats to kick the baby out of Ashley were vital to the defense's case. It demonstrated that Ashley had reason to fear for her life and the life of her unborn child.
Ashley's attorneys asked the jury to see her not as a murderer, but as a mother, desperate to protect her child.
Ashley claimed she ran in the house to get a kitchen knife just to scare the other group of people, and things got out of hand.
The intent to stab and kill, I think it was more of an intent to frighten away and leave me and my kids alone and cut this out.
On November 21st, 2005, after 3 days of deliberations, the jury returns with its verdict. They don't believe Ashley was acting in self-defense.
There were no other weapons around. I mean, everyone was throwing punches. Why would she stab Christina in the back as she's walking away? I mean, that's not self-defense. It just isn't.
However, the jury doesn't believe she committed murder either.
They were pretty undecided about who was telling the truth. And in the end, it was a mixed verdict. Ashley was convicted of the manslaughter and assault charges, but she was acquitted of the more serious charges of murder.
Heat of passion. That was the verdict. 5 years. That's all she got. 5 years for killing somebody that is not here no more.
I do believe that justice was served. I would have liked to have seen more time, but, there's a saying that justice is blind. Everyone has a different perspective.
A bitter feud between 2 mothers devoted to their children had ultimately resulted in tragedy for both families.
I lost one of my favorite people in the world, and sometimes I feel like it's my fault just because, like I said, it started from children arguments and things like that, and I think about it all the time.
This was just made no sense. In capital letters, made no sense. It started out between 2 young boys, one picking on the other, and 20 minutes later, you have someone dead.